Radio.
Alchemy Radio. Alchemy Radio. Alchemy Radio. Analyze. Conceive. Believe. Are you tuned in?
Hello and welcome to Alchemy Radio, where the only thing we ask of you is that you keep an open mind. Today's guest is James Swagger, author of the Newgrange Sirius Mystery, linking Pasage grave cosmology with Dogon symbology. While many people are aware of the solar and lunar alignments and the ceremonial functions of Pasage graves, there is also a hidden deeper meaning to many of these sites. They are not intentionally disguised, but rather a complex, intricate system of astronomy is employed at each site. When broken down and analysed, it seems quite clear. In fact, we have a definite line of research into these ancient monuments like no other archaeological field. James has travelled all over Europe and has been to 3/4 of the 100 plus Pasage grave sites in Ireland in his quest for explanations of their cosmology. James, how are you?
How you doing, John? Good to be on the show.
And it's great to have you because you're a guy who's going to open up a brand new world to us and to all the listeners, because we're going to talk about Newgrange Sirius, and anything with the word mystery in the title has got to be interesting. But before we delve into it, give us a bit about your background, where you come from and how you got from where you were to where you are now.
Sure. I actually come from a science and engineering background. Most of my career I've actually worked in heavy industrial control and automation, information processing. Typical jobs would be oil rigs, power plants, wind farms, water treatments. I hold 2 master's degrees, one in engineering and one in science, research and society, which is my most recent one. Like most people in Ireland or Northern Ireland, I've travelled for work. I think Ireland's quite an educated race, but we actually export our best educated people because there ain't enough jobs here for us. So I travelled most of Europe. My mother's Danish. I had an offer to go over there, and off I travelled when I was 18, and came back, studied a little bit back in Northern Ireland, Queens, back over to Denmark again, and it's also another megalithic hotspot. And I'd asked myself the question if these Pasage graves appear in Denmark, and they're also in Ireland, and of course that was just a little opener for me, and I realised that we had lost a megalithic civilization, and it had appealed to me as a mystery to encourage myself to study into it. And I'd been based in the UK for about 10 years for my career, and I'd always sought out the megalithic civilization in the British Isles, mostly Britain at that time. I'd been up as far as Scotland, down as far as Cornwall. I'd also travelled across to Carnac. I lived in Plymouth at the time. There's a good little ferry service over to Brittany, and I traversed to Carnac quite a few times, and I really started to feed my brain on the megalithic civilization and really kind of get a good instill the information. And I guess it was more of a mystery to me and not enough insight. And I'd returned to Ireland after probably about a 10-year absence, and I was bringing a friend of mine, an Australian, and he'd been to Newgrange before, and I said to him, well, I know another one not too far around the corner, which is called Doth's Pasage grave, which I go into in the book also. And I seen some constellation rock art signifying the Pleiades constellation on the western side of the mountain. Now, I had seen this rock art before, but I never thought anything about it. The last time I seen it was probably about 20. And I was a bit of a young pup at the time. I had no serious interest in anything. I'd just go around and just kind of have a little look at things and wouldn't have any deep meaning for it. But this time I had a different skill set. I'd read a lot when I was away. I'd probably got into the subject of archaeoastronomy from the likes of Robert Bauval. He opened up the door for people with regards to the pyramids of Giza and the Orion correlation theory. And for those that don't really know what archaeoastronomy is, it's just a mongrel science of archaeology and astronomy, with also a little bit of cultural and mythology mixed in with it. So I went and I researched the constellation rock art again, and the light switched on for me that there wasn't a lot about this in terms of archaeoastronomy. had a different skill set, had a different mindset, and it was kind of stunned myself that there was stuff there to look at. And I ended up going to a few other sites for personal interest again. Of course, I'd been absent out of Ireland for a long time, so I'd seen a lot of the megalithic civilization in Europe, and I just kind of come home again, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd actually wrote some articles for Historical Histories magazine in Ireland, which doesn't run anymore, but I did actually have the intention of writing a book, and I was going to write a chapter on megalithic civilization in the book, and just from historical mysteries, which was always an interest of mine.
Yeah.
Little did I know I was going to discover so much stuff that I actually ended up with a book on the megalithic civilization. And I actually ceased writing the book on historical mysteries about 2 years ago to do the megalithic research. I went off on a tangent totally, and the book's still on the shelf half wrote, so I do hope to go back to that at some point. So that's kind of how I got in. So I kind of got suckered into the megalithic civilization back in Ireland again. I come full circle as such. But in saying that, John, I actually had discovered some rock art up in Donegal in a place called Ardmore. And
right.
What really switched on for me there was it wasn't on record as being deciphered, first of all.
Okay.
It represents the constellations of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, more commonly known as the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, or the Big Saucepan and the Little Saucepan, or the Big Plough and the Little Plough. There's many names for them. The Big Bear and the Little Bear is another one. And of course, you can wind back the stars now on very advanced computer programs for astronomy, planetarium software. Most common one that's free and open to use is Stellarium. But there's many ones like Starry Night Pro, and you open up the program, you plug in your GPS coordinates of where you are, or your city, or your street, and you put your date and time, and you can just see what the stars look like. Yeah, you can see what the stars look like in 3 months from now, or you can go back 3 months, you can go back to 3000 BC. So yeah, that's would be the main tool of archaeoastronomy that you would use if you want to look at the skies, and there's a reason for that. I should probably explain what the reason behind the stars changing so long over time for the non-astronomers. We have three motions of the Earth. One is the daily motion of night and day. The second one would be the yearly motion going around the sun. But we have another motion that people aren't aware of unless you're in astronomy, and that's called precession of the equinoxes. Basically, we're standing on the Earth and we look up at the stars, and over 26,000 years, there's a wobble in the Earth. Now, 26,000 years is a very long time for the Earth to be wobbling. It's basically like a spinning top, John.
Yeah.
Yeah. So precession of the equinoxes has the effect that if we stand on the Earth, look up at the stars, there's going to be a wobble that takes 26,000 years for one complete wobble. And the effect is basically the stars will shift 1 degree every 72 years. Yeah.
Okay, and it's a precession as opposed to procession.
Yeah, precession. And the reason they call that, if you were standing on the equator and you looked at the zodiac of everybody knows their star sign and they have their constellation of Gemini, Cancer, Leo, and you would see the constellations precessed, as in go backwards around the equator, and that's the effect of the wobble.
Right.
So
I get you.
that's where the term precession of the equinoxes come from. But for all intents and purposes, the effect is that the stars will shift 1 degree every 72 years. So if you look on the horizon today, you'll pick a constellation, you look at it, and this time next year you look at it, it will shift a little bit, but you won't notice it. It'll take 72 years looking on that point on the horizon year after year until you'll see it shift 1 degree. So
right.
So it's just getting past that. That's why the stars all shift and change over so much time. So in saying that, Newgrange is famous for its most common alignment is of the winter solstice sunrise on the morning. 15 minutes of the 21st of December in the morning time, it will penetrate the passage, and it takes a year for it to repeat again. It's famous the world over for this solar event, but it's it's quite a novelty in terms of modern and our modern age, because these monuments are very complex things. They were aligned to stars. They had calculations of the moon. It wasn't just a solar event penetrating the passage, and that's what they're most famous for. It's probably the only thing they're famous for, to be honest. But there is some other deep underlying, possibly hidden, but for no particular reason. It's just hidden because the astronomy is advanced, and you need to be versed in astronomy to have a little look inside these and see what's actually going on. Perhaps I should explain Newgrange for the listeners, exactly what Newgrange is and what a passage grave is and where it sits on the horizon up there.
Absolutely, yeah. By all means, go for it.
Right, so Newgrange is a passage grave, and the term passage grave is a bit of a misnomer because it just implies a burial function. But Newgrange passage grave is basically an observational platform where they looked at the skies and the heavens. Passage grave is typically an earth and rock mound with large curbstones with a passageway that runs mostly into the centre of the mound and has a chamber inside.
Right.
And typically inside the chamber there's ceremonial bowls where the cremated dead would be placed, which most people think on the winter solstice so that the sun would take their souls away. And that's the popular belief of what they were doing. But it's not the only type of passage grave. There's slightly different variations all across the country and across Western Europe. Beside Newgrange, you also have another one called Note and another one called Doth. And they're slightly different layouts. Note has an eastern and a western passage, taking in the autumn and spring equinox. Doth has the winter solstice sunset as opposed to Newgrange having the winter solstice sunrise. And it's got different art there, and it's different height and different kind of layout. So I should say Note has 18 small satellite mounds situated around it. So it's kind of clustered as well. So you don't see the same running theme at all these, John. They're, each one's got the same basic concept, but slightly different layout and structure.
And why, James, why did the ancients, why were they so fascinated with the skies and astrology and the stars?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest question of all, because we don't know who built these things. So we have to peer back and look at what they did.
Right.
And what we find is that they have this skill set of looking at the stars. And then of course, that's the most obvious question. What were they doing? What were they looking at the stars? What were they about? And that's what we have to do, is kind of psychologically profile these people and understand how they lived, what they did, because that's the only way we're going to answer who these people were. We have to actually profile who they were. And the best way we have to do that is to look at what they did. And the biggest thing they left us was astronomy. Now, the astronomy that they did, John, is given the name observational astronomy. And basically that means you look with your naked eye above at the heavens and watch for cycles.
Okay.
And we obviously have telescopes and we look deeper into space now, and that's what the term astronomy means. But that's how astronomy was done back in 3000 BC. And you'd be very surprised, John, what you can actually find out from using observational astronomy. An example is if you observe the sun on the horizon, for starters, yeah? The most basic motion to understand is the sun. Mm-hmm. You would see the sun rise in the east, set in the west, and that's on the autumn equinox and the spring equinox. It's different for summertime and it's different for winter time. So it would have a most easterly point and a most westerly point on the horizon. And then on the summer solstice, it would rise, on the longest day of the year, it would rise at a certain point. And you might be able to find out where that was. And there's evidence then that they did that. They seemed to hammer out exactly when the winter solstice was and when the summer solstice was and when these equinox days. So that's 4 points of the year. They broke down their solar year into 4 quarters. So, I mean, that may seem obvious to people, but that's the first lesson of an observational astronomy. It's finding out a cycle of the sun by just observing over long periods of time and watching for differences and watching for similarities. Then you have to understand that these guys knew an awful lot of information about the complex cycles of the moon. Now, for those non-astronomers out there, the moon is a very sophisticated motion. It mostly goes around the equator, but we've got a tilt on the Earth as well, and then it's got two types of lunar month. There's the sidereal lunar month and the synodic lunar month, which they both knew about at Noth. There's evidence that they knew that they're both types of lunar months. I'll spare the details of the astronomical knowledge first of all.
Okay.
So yeah, there's other complex cycles like the Metonic cycle, which basically means every 19 years that the moon's going to come back to its full cycle. And basically 19 solar years is equal to so many lunar months. Yeah, and it's to within a couple of decimal points. So yeah, there's this Metonic cycle, and they obviously knew about that as well because they were obsessed with the number 19 at Noth, and everything they counted was like a lunar calculation. So it's really quite fascinating when you just get into solar and lunar. And in mainstream archaeology, they tend to leave that up to other researchers, and it's pretty much accepted with the solar phenomenon that occurs at Newgrange. It's really just a given that the solar thing was monitored. Some people, you're allowed to go into lunar activity and kind of make a few prepositions about that, but after that, most people don't know anything about them. Like, yeah, there's not a lot of research being done.
Yeah.
So I was compiling research for the book, and of course Newgrange is the megalithic hotspot in Ireland for passage graves. It's like a spokesperson for every passage grave out there, Western Europe and all. Like, it's probably the most famous passage grave there is. And there's a reason for that. And Newgrange complex is considered the most complex megalithic site in the world. There's an awful lot of rock art at Noth and Newgrange. There's something like 40% of all the rock art in the whole of Europe is at that site, them two sites. And that alone is astounding. So a lot of researchers just come to Newgrange and Noth, and they just kind of get stuck in them, and that's where everybody seems to get attracted to in the limelight. But I just thought that, if you're going to do a thorough research, you got to go and see the other passage graves in Ireland. So there's two other famous cemeteries. I'm not sure if you're actually aware of, John. There's the Loch Crew Cemetery complex of passage graves in County Meath.
I'm not, no.
No, and there's another one called Carrowkeel in Sligo.
Yeah, I've heard of Carrowkeel, yeah.
Yeah, well, Carrowkeel's quite unique and quite different. I'll start with that first because that's where things really opened up for me on the research. Personally, John, I didn't know what I was going to find. I was just kind of jumping straight in again, and I was finding out some little links through astronomy and applying some of my science and research that I qualified myself to do. So it was a bit of fun for me at the start, but it's become quite an academic research project for me. And Carrowkeel's quite different because, and in a good way, because there's only one monument there that really opens up to, possibly two, that opens up to solar and lunar activity. And the reason being, all the rest of the other monuments are aligned to pretty much close to north. So it could be a few degrees from north or a few degrees after north, but pretty much to a narrow band, there's a lot of these passage graves aligned to close to due north. Now the sun rises and sets in due east and due west on the autumn and spring. The closest it gets to north is about northeast and northwest on the sunrise and sunset. So this automatically rules out the sun, and it automatically rules out the lunar activity. Then the mind boggles and it goes, well, what were they looking at? So I realised, well, it doesn't leave very much. It's the stars or a constellation. So I applied my astronomy program, and what you do is you wind the stars back to 3,500 BC, and I developed a thing called the Carrowkeel Cassiopeia theory. Cassiopeia is a constellation. It looks like a wonky W, I call it. There's 5 stars, and if you can think of where you would draw a W, each point is a star. So
right.
You've got 5 cairns or passage graves up there aligned to each star of Cassiopeia to within like 1 degree of accuracy, which then is kind of phenomenal because this correlation only happens at exactly 3,500 BC due to this effective precession of the equinoxes. And that also fits in beautifully when these things were expected to be built. Carol Keel's quite different as well, and to the other ones in certainly Note and Newgrange, because there's no major mound up there. They all look about the same size, and it's quite disorientating when you're in Carol Keel Cemetery Complex because they all look the same and the landscape all looks the same, and they're at something like 300 meters above sea level. So it's quite daunting when you're up there and you have a plan of all these passage graves, which one is which and where you're looking at. And so yeah, that's when the astronomy really kicked in, and I realized that these guys really had what I call a passage grave cosmology, and it was quite advanced. So yeah, it's quite a daunting subject to jump into to try to explain to people. But in the book, I've tried to lay it out in 3 sections, and the first one was the given alignments. That it was get the maps, the plans out, get the given alignments, compile the data that's accepted by everyone. The middle section then I jumped into a bit of rock art, mostly constellations, to show that they were looking at constellations and a couple of the new discoveries that I had, but also to show that they were looking at the stars as well, which most people don't look into. It's not accepted, it's not a generally accepted theory yet anyway. And also some of the lunar rock art at Note. And then towards the end of the book, there's 4 theories that are mine, and then 2 other theories belonging to other people that I've slightly tweaked a little bit. But the theories then compile exactly what I've kind of discovered in the book and put some stuff together. So that was the general layout of the book, and I've done a lot. I've put like 64 images in to explain for people in terms of passage grave plans, pictures of passage graves, and computer simulations. So it's quite an enthralling read, and you don't have to be very adverse in astronomy to do it. So that was the main idea of the book.
And there's something I want to touch on, because when Newgrange, I suppose, was excavated properly and rebuilt, a team headed by Michael J. O'Kelly, I believe.
Yeah, that's a good point now. I'm listening. Go on.
Yeah, there is a theory that you mentioned rock art, and there is a huge amount of rock art there, but there's a theory that it was deliberately rebuilt slightly incorrectly to hide some of the secrets, I suppose, that Newgrange holds. First and foremost, I mean, it gets a lot of criticism. I mean, some people get quite irate that they did that. I mean, some of the other less known cairns and passage graves of Ireland, they pretty much were accepted that they were pointed like a pyramid or topped. You topped with, like, they piled stones on top of each other till they got to a point, which would naturally be in a point if you kept piling stones up on top of each other. And they topped them all with white quartz. And the problem with Newgrange is all this, the point had slipped off it, and all the material was slippage. Now, what they rebuilt that white face or white wall with was actually just material they found on the site. But a lot of people now realise the mistake that they made, that it was most likely a white pointed cairn, pyramidic shape. And you got to understand, Newgrange, when for thousands of years, was literally covered over and sealed with the slippage. And I think it was 1699, a farmer was digging up some of the curbstones in the Great Circle for some building materials to put a road onto his land. They just happened to dig the entrance out. So it's only been in our modern viewpoint for the last 300 years or so, and it was in the 1960s that Michael J. O'Kelly, I don't know why he decided to put that up, or how he got that sanctioned, really, that wall. I mean, they had to put a concrete wall in to hold that white quartz facade up, and I mean, there is stuff hidden in behind it. It's just a shame that they seem to have got away with doing that, really. Like, I mean, still get a lot of criticism today, John. Like, I should say that the materials to build Newgrange came from quite far away as well. You probably heard that on the tour yourself, John.
Yeah.
The quartz actually comes from the Wicklow Mountains, 40 miles to the south. The grey cobblestones that they used on the quartz wall as well, they came 20 miles to the north in Clogherhead, not far from the town of Newry, I suppose.
And that's pretty incredible in itself when you consider I suppose, the difficulty of transporting. So is there any theory as to why they would have specifically sought out stone from so far away?
This is what they don't tell you on the tour, John. That's a good point. I think the grey wacky curbstones came from the nearest source 10 miles away as well. They were the big giant curbstones, a couple of tons each.
Yeah.
But what they don't tell you is they make you they lead you to believe that there was a research community going out looking for materials, right? Just leave it open like that, and you would naturally assume that these guys went out looking for materials to build their little monuments. But that's not the case, because where each of these places where they got the materials from, there's passage graves there as well. In the Wicklow Mountains, I've been there quite recently. There's a place called Seafin Hill. It's just on the border of the Dublin and Wicklow Mountains. Wouldn't be far from Tibradden Peak. There's a passage grave on Tibradden, which is in Dublin, and then there's another passage grave in Wicklow Mountains called Seafin Hill. That's Seefin. A Seafin Hill is something like 637 meters above sea level, like about 1,800 feet or something. It's on a military firing range, and you can only go visit it when the red flag's down. So it doesn't get a lot of people visit it. But inside the passageway, they have quartz along the walls. Yeah, and this is where the quartz came from to build Newgrange. But they don't tell you that. So up to the north, you have Slieve Gullion passage grave. It's the highest passage grave in Ireland, and that's not far from where the grey cobblestones come from. So all across the northeast and northwest of Ireland, there's a barrage of passage graves, and they knew where the materials are at because they were building at those places as well. But they just don't seem to tell you that on the tour. They just want to get people shuffled in and shuffled out, and I don't think they're doing a good service to the monuments for what they represent, really. That's my personal perspective on it, John.
Right.
But the archaeology, they don't delve into astronomy. It's not their science. That's fair enough. They're concentrated on their perspective, and that's what they're about. But they do hold the keys to the monuments, and they do say what happens at them, and so there's kind of a barrier there for any research to be done, especially at Newgrange and Noth. But I should also say a little bit about Lough Crew. Lough Crew also has a solstice event. It's about 40 kilometres to the west of Newgrange. It's still in County Meath, but it's quite close to the Cavan border. Mm-hmm. And when you're on top of Lough Crew, you can see 1/3 of Ireland from that spot alone, which is quite dramatic.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I should also say Slieve Gullion in Armagh, where I was telling you about, you could possibly see 1/3 of Ireland from that point as well. You've got the low plains of Dundalk below you and Louth. You've also got Dundalk Bay. You can see as far as Wicklow, the Wicklow Mountains to the south, 60 miles away. You can see Slieve Bloom to the west in Leitrim. You can see Lough Neagh behind you, Carlingford Lough. So the places where they chose these higher ones were absolutely dramatic. I mean, they could see for miles. I often also wonder, when they had their ceremonial burials, they obviously had to have funeral pyres to cremate their dead outside these. So the fire to burn a body and cremate it has to be very intense. I don't know if you know that. It would need to be massive logs and like a funeral pyre, like.
Okay.
To do it like in an old school way, I'm talking about. I mean, you would have to chop down several trees to do that, like. So these fires would have been seen for a long distance, and if all these passage graves were on a line of sight, they would have known that a member of the community had died. Something I only thought of in retrospect after writing the book, when I was thinking about the actual ceremonial and the burial function. Something I haven't concentrated on too much in the book. I'm more gone down the astronomy route. So Yeah, it's kind of funny that they just seem to concentrate on these things as the passage graves only, and I guess archaeology, they only seem to concern themselves with the head count, what they call the head count of passage graves. They find out the bodies that were there and how many there was. And a kind of curious finding is that they find children alongside the adults buried in these passage graves, which then tells you that it wasn't just the astronomers there. There was a cultural aspect to it. Perhaps people died younger back then. I don't know. They often say that the people buried at the passage graves didn't have a life expectancy more than 30 years, which I'm not too sure about. But I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense because, and they say 30 tops, it could be 25. So if the life expectancy is 25 years, they reckon Newgrange took at least 50 years to build. So that's 3 generations just to build one monument. You know, so the mind boggles at this point then.
Yeah.
Once you get into it.
And I suppose another boggling factor is the number of these all over, well, not just all over Ireland, but all over Europe and the world. I mean, there's obviously within the cultures that existed, and we will realise there was, I suppose, a great divergence of cultures, and because of the limitations with travel thousands and thousands of years ago, people wouldn't necessarily have been in contact, for example, with people in Portugal wouldn't necessarily have been in constant contact with people in Ireland, or that's how, I suppose, the conventional wisdom goes.
That's what I wonder, John. I do wonder that because, and that's a very good point, because I do get into that at the end of the book. I didn't want to leave the reader unhinged totally as to, just give them all the data and then let them make their own mind up. I did speculate a little bit who the builders were and a few conclusions from what accepted data is. So was there some what they call rudimentary contacts? I'm not too sure. I mean, if you go into the Egyptian civilization, they have cocaine and tobacco in the hair samples on some of the mummies. So they talk about the way the Egyptologists get around that. They call it rudimentary contact with the New World over in South America. Mm-hmm. Was there an ancient maritime culture circumnavigating the world? I don't know. There's evidence to suggest the Phoenicians were traveling to South America, or at least to the Bahamas region. So I'm not too sure. What I do know is that a maritime culture did build these passage graves because they're all along the west coast of Europe, southwestern Portugal, northwestern Spain, Brittany in the Karnak region, Holland, Denmark, some in Sweden, but they're pretty ruinous now, not much left. The north, east and northwest of Scotland, and the northeast and northwest of Ireland. So, if you look at a map and the topography of where these places were built, they're all coastal regions. Again, you have the same unified concept of the passage grave, which is basically the earth and rock mound, the curbstones, large megalithic blocks, all got some sort of an equinox or solstice alignment, some slightly individualistic styles, but you do also have strange links that doesn't explain it. And what I mean, I'll give you an example. You have in the Alcalá cemetery complex, the passage graves there have some art that has survived, and what it's called chevron art, which basically looks like a chevron under pottery, and it's got links to the passage graves in Scotland. So you have at the two ends of the megalithic region where these are situated a very strong common link, but in between you don't. You seem to have commonalities and links between two ends of Western Europe. So that doesn't make sense. You would think there would be a common link between the two closest regions, like maybe Ireland and Scotland, or Holland and Denmark, and then you have it's like the civilization that built this. I kind of describe it as if, let's say, a civilization was from they were refugees on a boat and they all hit lands, the Western Atlantic seaboard. They just started their civilization up again in pockets, and that's what it looks like. That pockets pocked up here. Some of them, I reckon, some of them had artisans in the boat. Some of them had engineers. Some of them had astronomers. Some of them had mystery. But there wasn't an even distribution of all these specific trades in each boat. And that's the only way that I can explain it. It's like it's a theory that I have. It's the refugee by boats theory. But
and where do you think they might have come from, James?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a tough one because we know that there's megalithic monuments, not specifically passage graves around the Mediterranean basin as well. You got Malta, you got massive megalithic complexes over there. So I mean, the thing is, it doesn't seem to have started in one region and spread to another. It seems to have started in all these regions at the same time, all around 3200 BC, which then begs the question: if you carbon date some of the places, they're all within the same region of time. What you don't get is Alcalar complex in Portugal older than Scotland, or Scotland older than Alcalar, or anything in between. So there doesn't seem to be one place that's older than another. They were all within a couple of 100 years of construction. So again, that fits with the refugee by boat theory. And it's another reason why you kind of think that, because it's the only thing that really makes sense. If you go to the history of Noth, which they'll tell you on the tour, the Celts would date back to 1500 BC, and they inhabited Noth Passage grave.
Okay.
And they would have wrote in their annals, their later mythologies and histories, if you want to call it that, the people who built the passage graves, not particularly passage graves, they actually refer to the megalithic civilization, or the ones that built with the large stones, or that they actually came from the western seas, which would mean the Atlantic. But again, we don't know what's out there. I mean, there is no landmass out there except this American life. So whether there's a sunken island out there, there's legends of sunken landmasses. I did mention that in the book as well, because there is one off the coast of Cork. I don't know if you're actually aware of this.
I am, but tell the listeners about this. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And I'm glad you know about it then, because they're not. It's called Porcupine Bank because it's a sand bank. When you take the cross profile of it, it looks like a porcupine's back. Yeah. So this sand bank is about how low it is. I'm not quite sure from the sea level now. But at one point it was above sea level. There's an author called Graham Hancock. He's gone into ancient maps and stuff, and something I like to read about is ancient histories as well, historical mysteries. And he points out that there's older source maps that show a little island off the coast of southwest of Ireland, about 100 miles from Cork, I think it is, or 100 miles from Kerry.
Are we talking about Brazil here?
Yeah, High Brazil is called on the maps. And it's quite fitting that there's a sandbank just underneath where High Brazil is shown on the map. Now, there's been expeditions sent to go and discover High Brazil from Bristol in the 1800s. Now, of course, High Brazil is long gone, but they didn't know that then. But it's always been there as in mythology that there's a sunken landmass there. So the idea is not coming from nowhere.
And it's not disappearing either, because a lot of people would, I suppose, refer to as the second Atlantis, and we know the Atlantis myths and legends haven't gone away, and this seems to be the same, although it's not widely spread or widely known at all in Ireland.
No, it's not. It's something I love to talk about. It's not something I wanted to go into in the book, because I wanted to keep it as a kind of an academic and a thorough research project that to bring the astronomy to life. But I did speculate a little bit at the end, and I did throw it out there because I didn't want to unhinge the reader as to what this is all about. But everybody wants to know then, well, who are these guys? Who built it?
Yeah. So
that's why I did go into that at the end of the book. But yeah, I mean, it's quite fitting that the Celts, and their mythologies or histories, which you want to call it, it's up to yourself. But it's quite fitting that they said the Western Seas, and it's quite fitting that there's this legend of a sunken landmass, and that there's a little sunken island there, geographically shown where High Brazil is shown on maps. There's actually 2 or 3 maps. I might just put that up on the webpage, John.
Yeah.
I should really have done that. I update the webpage quite regularly. I'm trying to. It's in its infancy at the moment. I shouldn't really give the webpage. It's Newgrange and I try to give a lot of articles and a lot of diagrams of what I'm actually talking about in the book as extra stuff for the reader. I got a couple of research papers from a scientist in Portugal in the document sections showing what I'm talking about as well. So, I often wonder: is there a sunken landmass? Is it Atlantis? I mean, if you read some of the mythologies of Ireland and what the Celts say, I mean, it reads like science fiction, modern science fiction.
That's right.
I mean, the Fair Bolg and the Fomorians, and I mean, it's astronomical what they're talking about. Like, I mean, they're talking about force fields and people circling the force field trying to break in. And I mean, you think a modern science fiction writer wrote it, like, you know.
It's incredible, and I think there's a tendency by a lot of people, and I would certainly have been guilty of this in the past, to just dismiss myths and legends as exactly that, and to assume that they're fairy stories. But I disagree with that personally. Maybe you can give me your view on it, because I don't think these myths came...
myself, John, and up until I was in my mid-20s, I would like... I'm very much black or white guy, you know, and that's the engineering, the science.
Yeah.
You know, I guess, like, I mean, the first time I ever remember my attention being captivated by knowledge and history, I was reading, I must have been about 10, I read a lot, Mark, and I remember, I can't remember where I was reading about it, but it was about the lost city of Vilcabamba, Machu Picchu in Peru. Mm-hmm. And I remember looking at this in the book, and it was probably a little encyclopedia or something, and I remember looking at this ancient lost city and was like totally flabbergasted how this could be, how this place could be lost. And, you know, I'd often read about ancient civilizations for that reason, how the greatness of ancient Egypt and how this was all lost again. I'm like, how did this place fall apart? How did this go to disarray? And then the Romans, the Greeks, and all the great civilizations, and how they fought, rose and fall. And you know, you've got mythologies that go with that, and folklore and stuff, and there may very well be a core of truth in that, but I had always dismissed it. I just wanted the hard fact. I wanted the ancient history. I wanted to know, you know, how they built the monuments. I didn't want to go into that mythology or folklore that would be associated with it. And here's one for you. I've actually come back full circle, because in the book I talk about a link to Dogon symbology, and totally off the subject of astronomy, I found a link with to the Dogon tribe in West Africa and some of their symbology, and there's 5 points of commonality that really beg answers. And
well, tell us a little bit about that. Let's talk about the Dogon first, and who they are, who they were, and how the link comes in with Newgrange and the Dogon tribe. Yeah.
Okay, right, I'll expand on that a little. The Dogon are a very fascinating tribe. They're off the charts in terms of tribes in Africa. I mean, they have astronomical knowledge of the Sirius star system. They have refused to be influenced by outside cultures. They have tried to convert them to different religions, to change their religion, and they just refuse. They actually are believed to have marched out of Egypt with ancient science and knowledge because they didn't want to be influenced from the change of regime there. And so they were presumed to have been, there's books being wrote by Lawrence Granton and Robert Temple about this. Mm-hmm. And they're believed to have marched out of Egypt across the top of North Africa. And then around the west coast of Africa to their present resting place in Mali. Now they have no modern tools. They collect pigeon dung for fertilizer and stuff like that. I mean, they're quite nomadic tribe like, but they have this dance and culture and science knowledge, and that's just so out there and just different, and it's crazy like. So yeah, they have this oral history that they teach to each other. And two French anthropologists went there in the 1930s to research them. They lived with them, and they were the first people in the Westerners to be accepted in and taught their culture. Of course, they did it from an anthropological perspective. They didn't judge what they were being told. They just documented everything. And for a long time it was in French. It hadn't been translated, their work, into English, and it was the works of Robert Temple that I mentioned, the Sirius Mystery.
Yeah.
That he'd kind of opened the lid on it, and they have a lot of symbology and diagrams and symbols that they use. One is the spiral, which is common at Newgrange. Another one is a rayed disc. It's on my webpage. I have a little article on that. It's basically a circle with several little rays out of it. They call them sun wheels. They're basically to represent the sun. And it's quite fitting that in Loch Crew and Doth, these sun wheels are actually the exact same as what the Dogon use. And also they have the spiral was what the Dogon use as well. But the sun wheel represents the heliacal rising of a star or a constellation in the Dogon, and that's exactly what it represents at Doth Passage Grave as well. So not only are they using the same symbol, but they're using the same symbol to describe the same thing, which is just totally uncanny. Now, next question after that is, what's the connection? Did they build? I'm not suggesting for the minute they built it, but there seems to be a common thread of influence or thread of knowledge there. How that's come about, I'm not entirely sure.
Because I suppose the great anomaly with the Dogon is that the information that they have is impossible for us to obtain without using modern telescopes, yet these guys have had it going back generations and generations.
Yeah, I mean, they say that that Sirius is actually a triple star system, and it's often purported to be a binary star system, but it's actually a triple star system. Sirius is very close to us, actually. It's quite I think it's the fifth closest star to Earth. I think Alpha Centauri is the closest one, but Sirius is quite close to us as well. And their whole myth and folklore is about the star Sirius. And of course it was to the ancient Egyptians as well. There's another commonality and link there. I mean, I get into that in the Newgrange Sirius Mystery, that I believe that Newgrange in the epoch of 3200 BC was almost aligned to the star Sirius. And in 3000 BC, Sirius rises on the horizon at the same point as the sun. And therefore, Sirius by default would automatically light the inner chamber up just like the sun would. And that's not an abstract idea, John. The ancient Egyptians did that. They had the temple of Dendera lit up at night time with the star Sirius. It would shine down the chambers. And as the effective procession developed over years, they would actually rip down temples and rebuild them in Egypt to realign them to the star Sirius. So this worship of Sirius is across a lot of ancient cultures, and I just found another link with it at Newgrange, which is why I've titled the book The Newgrange Sirius Mystery. It's where my research led me to. It's one such theory of about 6 at the end of the book. So yeah, I mean, I didn't concentrate too much on the Dogon symbology, but I really did think it was worthy of a link, the mention of the link to it, because not a lot of people want to touch it, and it's not mainstream, I will agree, but it's there nonetheless, and it does need answering. There's another guy called Philip Coppens. He's an author, researcher as well, and he's talked about the ancient Greeks talking about it. This is the myth lore that I've come back to just on a different note. He's wrote about the Greeks talking about the temple called Hyperborea, the Hyperborean temple of the north. And it's most likely candidate for that temple is actually Callanish stone circle. And there's a couple of reasons for that, because there's 3 points of criteria that the Greeks talked about. They said that the temple was aligned to the Pleiades as it's set in the west, and it only happens at that latitude where Callanish is at. Yeah. So there's 3 definite points, and there is no other thing into the north that temple could be. And they speak about legends of a black race of people. I hope I'm clearly correct saying that, that a black race of people built the temple of Hyperborea, which is, if that is Callanish stone circle, then there possibly was a black race of people building megalithic monuments. And again, they were supposed to have come by boat to build the temple. They actually shipped the stones from another place, especially to build Callanish stone circle. At least that's the history stroke mythology folklore of Callanish. So yeah, I just find that very interesting, that that's another point of research that has kind of popped up that might explain the Dogon symbology. I mean, if there's a transfer of knowledge, quite possibly. I think our knowledge of the past is murky at the best. I don't think it's as clean cut as we like to think. If you take Alcalá megalithic complex in southern Portugal, it's quite close to North Africa, obviously across the Straits of Gibraltar, if you want to call it that. And that's where the Dogon marched. So if there's a maritime culture coming past North Africa at the same time as the Dogon, there's talk of megaliths and stone circles in North Africa as well. Not something I've actually gone into and researched. This loosely documented. It's a hard area to get into and research by any means at the moment. So they were in close proximity to the Dogon in Portugal, building passage graves. So there's another point of commonality that they could have actually transferred their knowledge. So I don't feel the need to say that the Dogon built passage graves in Ireland. I don't think so.
Yeah,
I do think the maritime culture had some links with the Dogon or the same teachers. I should say that the Dogon also worship the Pleiades, or they have knowledge of the Pleiades system. They bring it into their folklore as well, and that's what Doth is aligned to, the Pleiades constellation. So, yeah, it seems quite muddled and mixed up, and it's quite strange and fascinating to be jumping into a subject on top of a subject, because that's really what's happened. I mean, if you can raise your passage grade of cosmology and get in there and see what exactly happened at these monuments, you get led into another field of research, and you go, oh right, this isn't what we're taught in school. This isn't. We're just taught that these megalithic civilizations just appeared, and it was a megalithic civilization, and that's it, and don't ask any more questions. So.
Well, that's exactly it. And I suppose the more questions we ask, the more we are led to, and the more answers we seek. And you mentioned Philip Coppens, and he wrote a book which I suppose for many people when it comes to this subject is the elephant in the room. His book is The Ancient Alien Question, and the link there, I suppose, with the Dogon tribe is their claim that the sacred knowledge that they have was given to them by, and this is going to seem out there for a lot of people, but was given to them by a race of godlike extraterrestrials, if you want to call them that, who actually came from the Sirius system. Where do you stand on this ancient alien question, James?
Again, I do actually know of that. I do know. I actually don't. I'm friends with Philip, but I actually never read Philip on Facebook, but I've never actually read any of Philip's work, I have to say. Okay. I do go onto his website sometimes because he writes very interesting, thorough articles on his website, which is where I came across that Kalanish Hyperborean article, and he's a great source of information as well. But I mean, all around the world there's talk that Sirius and Sirius and the Pleiades in folklore are heavily linked with extraterrestrial godlike beings coming here and giving us knowledge. Like, could well be. I don't feel the need to go there.
Okay.
Just in terms of the book, the research, I'm trying to get people raised up and understand that first and foremost there's a passage grade cosmology. But yeah, I'm certainly aware of all that, and I think that's totally fascinating too. I think it'll be about 20 years, John, before we can actually be able to talk about that in about mainstream academic circles, and it won't be a taboo subject anymore, because it is a taboo subject at the moment. Certainly with the Dogon, because it's out there a lot.
Very much so, and it's something that anytime the question is raised in the mainstream, it's shut down instantly. It's a dirty subject. Nobody wants to touch it in mainstream. They go, oh, get rid of that. Well, that's ET talk, but I mean, the thing about the Dogon is Robert Temple goes into that, and he's a very good point. He says, we don't know that they didn't have telescopes, and I'll tell you why. There's evidence of ancient crystals being carved to a very high degree of accuracy. Yeah.
He goes into that in, I can't remember the name of the book. It could be The Crystal Sun or something, I think, like that. It's the second book that Robert Temple done. And I mean, if you go to the British Museum, they've got one of the crystals. It's called the Nineveh lens. It comes from Babylonia, and it's been tidally ground. Now, crystal, you have to understand, is a very hard. Diamond is only harder than rock crystal. Silicon dioxide is its name. And diamond is the only other harder substance. So you have to cut or grind crystal with either diamond or crystal. Not only that, these lenses that have been found, we're talking these lenses going back to 3000 BC. So these lenses have been toroidally ground. Now, I should say a toroid is a donut shape. Yeah. So then that makes no sense, because the toroid shape would have to be crystal or diamond. So if something is toroidally ground, that means the shape that carved it was a donut shape. And to get something a donut shape from crystal is harder to make than the crystal itself. So there's some sort of a level of ancient high technology out there. And crystal lenses, I mean, there's been hundreds of them found in Egypt, Babylon. I think even Caesar had a green crystal lens that corrected his myopic eyesight. So yeah, to suggest that they didn't have a telescope, they could well have had a telescope. Whether they would see Sirius with that, I don't think so. But yeah, there is evidence that there's a lost ancient science out there, and we don't know where it come from. We really don't. Like.
And do you think then there's a certain mainstream, or not just mainstream, but maybe it's a human trait, but a kind of an arrogance that the human race has when it comes to science and history and that kind of thing, that we always assume at whatever point in time we're at, we always assume that the knowledge we have is all there is to know out there. I mean, you can go back, I suppose, to Galileo's times, or the assumption that the world was flat and this kind of thing. We're kind of like that still to this day, even though we have, I suppose, a higher technological level of understanding than existed back then.
Sure. I think the answer to that is twofold. I think you've got, first and foremost, you've got the arrogance that you talk about, and it's very prominent in Egyptologists and archaeologists. They're very much a closed science. They're very rigid in their thinking. But setting the arrogance aside, there's also a knowledge filtering process, and it's how we work as a species. I mean, we just tend to filter out the information that doesn't fit and the stuff that does fit. I do it myself as an engineer and a scientist. I mean, you look first for the points of commonality, and that's what I've done in the book even. You look at the stuff that fits first, and you try and compile a picture to understand the fundamental grasp of something. And stuff that's anomalous and doesn't fit just naturally gets put on the shelf.
So it's almost like if someone comes up with a theory, they will only look at the information that fits that theory and discount anything else. Exactly,
and I say that's a natural human trait that we have. Now, it doesn't mean that it's right, and it doesn't mean that we still can't look at anomalous evidence, but I mean, there's a lot of anomalous evidence around the world, and it's indicative of something else. It's indicative of a different history that we actually have. And that's, again, something that I love about historical mysteries, that, like, I do go into, for the magazine I used to write for, I used to go into the origins of metallurgy, for example, the origins of astronomy, and, you know, the origins of the megaliths. And, I mean, the origin of metallurgy alone is just totally phenomenal, because it shouldn't exist. There's evidence that they knew how to make, for example, bronze, which is the mixture of copper and tin, as an alloy before they knew how to make ores, just to sample one ore and make one metal out of it. They seem to know about the alloying process first.
Which doesn't seem to make any sense.
Doesn't make any sense. And I'll give you an example. There's what's the name of it? Metsamor, I think it's in there. Where's it at? Is it in Armenia or Turkey? I can't remember. It's that long ago since I wrote about this. There's a megalithic ancient site beside a metallurgical complex called Metsamor. And there's evidence of metallurgy going back down there to like something thousands of years BC. And it seems that they were putting tin on the shelf that they knew it would be able to be alloyed with something at a later date. And if you look up on the dictionaries or encyclopedias of how they discovered metallurgy, you'll be told that they chucked a piece of ore into a campfire and it melted, and they seen the metal pour out, and then they knew how to make a metal. And that's just a lot of hogwash, because the temperature that you need to make even any ore melts, and for the metal to run out is serious. Like, I mean, you'd have to really. There seems to be no natural way to discover metallurgy. If you go back to the Sumerian civilization, they were told they were given the knowledge of metallurgy from another race of people that came from the north. There's other people who think that they're, again, godlike beings and Anunnaki and whatever, but I don't feel the need to go there either. I mean, there's 100 things they were given. They were given printing, they were given metallurgy, they were given astronomy, they were given governments, they were given school systems, they were given printing, carving. 100 of the first of mankind was given to the Sumerian culture. They had the Baghdad battery. and they reckon that could be 2000 BC, maybe more.
For those that don't know, it's essentially a fully functioning battery that is that old.
It's they didn't even know what it was until the 1930s. I mean, they sat in museums and they are just potato starch or grapefruit juice or as the acid to make the battery work. And again, of course, they found no wires with it, so they assumed that it was a curiosity to them, and that's how they explain it away.
Yeah.
But again, the Sumerian culture. Again, the crystal lenses are there as well. And I mean, the crystal lenses could be one of the things that really point out an evidence of a lost, technologically advanced civilization. Now, of course, our idea of a technological advanced civilization in our modern world is laptops, TVs, electronics-based industry. But if you look at the amount of people that use the technology, they're not very smart people. And I don't mean that in any disparaging term. Like, I mean, you don't have to be an electronics engineer to watch a telly, like, don't even know how it was made or how it was built. Most people don't even know the principles behind how it works. They just know that it works and they can use it. So that's our idea of a technology now. But technology in 3000 BC, I think, was astronomy, observation astronomy, moving large stones, large distances. How they did that, don't quite know. I mean, if you go to ancient Egypt, they were able to lift 200-ton stones. If you set aside the Giza pyramids for the moment, at the bottom of the Giza pyramids, there's the Sphinx Valley Temple, and they have something like 200-ton stones maneuvered into a tight corner. Now, we can lift a 200-ton stone today with several cranes, but we couldn't put them into a tight corner. We couldn't get the crane out or into a tight corner to do it. It has to be beside the stone that you're lifting. We can only get it up and down.
And indeed, experiments have been run in the last number of years, I think by teams of Japanese engineers most specifically spring to mind, where they tried to actually recreate some of what was done, and they simply couldn't do it with today's technology.
That's quite right. The Japanese seem to love having a little go at things, but that was a total failure, wasn't it? I do remember that. It was a documentary for the Discovery of National Geographic.
That's right. I think National Geographic, I remember seeing it. And
small scale pyramid, and it was a shambles what they did. Like, they couldn't even do a small scale model of it with all the modern equipment of today. So yeah, I mean, technology back then, I mean, they may have different intuition and different ways of doing things. I mean, there's other guys that reckon that the Celtic pagan cross is actually adapted. You know, it's the circle with the cross in the middle of it.
Yeah.
That it was actually modelled on a device that was used to measure the angle between Venus and give us what's called the megalithic yard. I think Adrian Knight goes into that in his book Civilization 1. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, all these megalithic sites have a unit of measurements, just like the pyramids of Giza have the cubit as their unit of measurement. So do the megalithic civilization. It's what's called the megalithic yard. And of course, nobody had a measuring stick going around all these different places, giving them, well, you want to use my measuring stick today and he should be using the same measurement as me. It didn't work like that. If they had contact, it was rudimentary and it wasn't much. So did everybody leave with the same measuring stick? Probably not. So what they used was their knowledge. And if you calculate the transition of Venus and you measure the angle to the sky and use this pendulum, it's quite a complex thing to explain. This cross inside a circle was a swinging pendulum, and it gave you what's a unit of measurement. If you did it all right on the same day when you observed Venus, you would have a measurement called what's known as the megalithic yard, and that's how they transferred the measurement. They just had different ways of doing things, John, yeah?
Yeah.
Different ways of transferring knowledge, and they used what they had. They didn't need material-based society. I mean, they used their head. They used a very clever acumen to transfer their knowledge and to not indulge in a material science. Maybe that wasn't their intention. Maybe they just used different parts of their brain. Who knows, like, you know.
And it's utterly fascinating. And I suppose we've spoken a lot about the sun and the stars, and you mentioned the moon at one point, and there's something I wanted to bring up with specific regard to Newgrange.
Sure.
And there are, I suppose, some theories that Newgrange has a lunar function as well. And it can even go back, if you look at I suppose, the Irish language or Gaelic, a derivative of Brú na Buine, which is the Irish for Newgrange, can actually mean white cow. And
that's correct, yeah.
It's been pointed out by some people, I think, that the period of gestation of a cow is equivalent to 9.5 lunar months. And Newgrange ties in some way, so the theory, or some of the theories go, that there is a lunar function. Can you shed some light on that? Because I'm quite interested in that.
Yeah, I have read into that, and it's quite a beautiful, fitting theory. I mean, there's a lot of things about Newgrange that I haven't talked about in particular. What I've concentrated on is the astronomy. But yes, there's other people talk about the phallic symbols that are at notes with the what they call the tall, thin ridge stone, and then the squatter stone for the male and female.
Yeah.
And they also talk about Newgrange being in the shape of a womb. It's like a kidney-shaped mound, and that the sun penetrating is like a sexual function to it. That the sun beam penetrating into the womb is what if you look as an aerial plan of Newgrange, it's got this sexual function to it, and it's so supposedly a womb, and the beam of sunlight would be the penetration into the womb. So yeah, there's these weird little anecdotal things to go alongside Newgrange. I'm open to them all. I think there's some good research into these things. I also think that the River Boyne was the Milky Way, which would also tie in close with the cow as well. That the white cow. I think there's a guy, Anthony Murphy, does talk about that.
Well, that's very interesting that you bring up the word womb as well, because as we said, Brú na Buine, which is the Old Gaelic. I know Brú, B-R-U-G-H, is a derivative of Brú, B-R-U Fada, which is the Irish for womb.
Yes.
And that's fascinating to me.
For that reason, yeah. I mean, that's something that, again, just gets relegated to discussions outside the archaeology. And, you know, I just think archaeology has a tight grip on that place, and just seem to have it's like a tight leash they keep on it, and all other ideas are on hold and not allowed to be mentioned. I mean, there's so many books wrote about Newgrange, but you just don't read this in very many books. It's alternative historians or mythologists that get to mention it in obscure passages alongside their other work, you know?
Yeah. So for somebody who might read your book, James, and they're thinking about going to Newgrange, whether they've been there before or to any other passage grave, indeed, whether they've been there before or haven't, what should people look out for, or what kind of an attitude should they have going in? Because we've already mentioned, I suppose, the mainstream or the dogmatic historical view that exists and that you will hear from guides, etc., etc. That's not to demean them in any way. But we know there is more, and you speak about so much more in your book. So what should people bear in mind if they're going to visit one of the passage graves?
I like that. That's good. Okay, first and foremost, don't get bamboozled by what Newgrange looks like on the horizon. Understand that it's reconstructed, first and foremost, but understand that it's part of a larger complex. If you look down towards the River Boyne, you'll see another baby passage grave, which you're not allowed to go to, but it's there. When you go to Noth, look back at Newgrange and understand Noth and its little setting, and understand that this whole thing has a collective function. Try and get that into the mindset. Have a good walk around and have a good look at the rock art, because everybody's got great ideas. I mean, it takes so many. I mean, there's not one person has gone around Newgrange, and Noth for that matter, and looked at all the rock art and deciphered it. I mean, it's come from so many different people, and each person is entitled to their viewpoint. That's great, but get it out there. If you got something, talk about it. And I mean, everybody that has their own theory on what the rock art means. Like, I mean, it might just spark off an idea in somebody's head, and it might just. I mean, we are raising our awareness of Newgrange and the rock art there. There is also something else I should mention and to look out for. There is art there that isn't astronomically associated, and it's indicative of alternative states of consciousness. When you go into a different state of consciousness, either through what some people thought maybe they were taking magic mushrooms, or they were doing starvation They were chanting rhythm and dance. There's various ways you can go into alternative states of consciousness. But regardless of how the method was achieved, when you do go into a different state of consciousness, you have a thing called an entoptic phenomena. Basically, you'll see images on your eyelids, like the shape of a letter U, squiggles, chevrons, dots. And there's a lot of rock art around the world that's indicative of entoptic phenomenon, especially the Lascaux cave art in France. And it's a whole different subject. But there is art there, and I think it's something I would love to go into one day and do another bit of research on, maybe write another book. But for the time being, my hands are full. But just if you go and look at the art, understand that there's these other symbology there that represents different states of consciousness. I'm trying to think of there's something like 10 different images that are indicative. So there's 10 points of reference for ASEs, they're called, alternative states of consciousness. So that's something probably that you wouldn't know to look out for. I think they do mention it. It depends on the tour guide that you get there, John, that would actually mention that. Because I've gone, I think maybe Newgrange, quite possibly 15, 20 times just over the years. And every time I go, I get a different story. I get a different regime of what's going on. No, I mean, I understand you get different people, and they've got. I think like the second last time I've gone now, I did get a good guide, and he was like, he hadn't a lot of people there that day, and he was quite excited, and he was throwing stuff out there. You know, you could tell he was just getting excited about the whole alternative thing as well. So yeah, you do. It depends on the guide you get that day as well. That would give you different knowledge, and they do churn out a different amount of guides. I mean, they constantly have guides doing the. I don't know whether they're volunteers or whether they work there, but there's a high turnover of guides at Newgrange, so you'll get a different story about them each time you go. But yeah, it's quite interesting to look at. And go to, but yeah, definitely go to the other two as well. Noth and Doth. Don't just treat Newgrange as its own. I mean, you actually get offered the choice when you go into Newgrange as well, which is, do you want to see Noth as well, or do you just want to do the Newgrange one? Yeah. Newgrange, of course, is open 12 months of the year, and Noth is only open 6 months of the year. I think it's still closed for archaeology. There's so much going on at Noth that they have to close it and maintain some of it those 6 months of the year. So if you can get to see Noth, do that as well.
And you mentioned some other sites as well, such as Carrowkeel and Lough Crew and Seacon Hill.
I mean, Lough Crew, we've just had an equinox there at Lough Crew, and I should actually talk about Lough Crew as well. Lough Crew seems to show an awful lot of evidence for calendar building and mapping the solar year, and the most basic breakdown of the solar year is the 4 points. That's the summer solstice, then the autumn equinox, then the winter solstice, then the spring equinox, and back again, yeah? And if you split those 4 quarters of the year in two again, you'll get another 4 days, and they're called the cross-quarter days, naturally, yeah? So if you picture a circle with 4 quadrants, you just split it up again into more quadrants. And those days that they occur on are what's still survive in the pagan calendar, close to May Day, Guy Fawkes Night, 5th of November, in Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane and Lunacy is the Gaelic terms for the pagan. And they still survive today to show them quarter days. But there's 2 peaks in Lough Crew, and the one that I mentioned, Carrantee, has the famous equinox sunbeam. But Lough Crew, the other peak, you're actually not allowed to go there, but I don't think anybody minds if you do walk up. I don't think there's public access there, but there's never anybody around. Right. But it's got the cross quarter day. I think the November 5th and February 4th solar alignments. It's got a white limestone standing stone inside. It's locked up. You can't get inside it. But you can look into the fence like, and it's got something like 20 cairns around it. It's quite phenomenal up there. So yeah, I mean, Lough Crew, it's quite close to Dublin, so it's not that far away from most. For a lot of tourists will make it a bit of effort to go there. Carrowkeel, again, very much off the beaten track. But Carrowkeel is quite special to me. I think it's quite a lovely complex to sit there and take in. It's a lovely walk up. it's quite a different ambience up there. It's quite a different feel. And again, I mean, it's got links to Newgrange and Note. I mean, I think the only two places to have a light box is Newgrange and Carnegie at Carrowkeel.
Right.
They call them cairns up at Carrowkeel, but they're passage graves. They're very short passages, but they're passage graves.
And of course, in Carrowkeel, you can see the kind of pyramidic shape that you had mentioned earlier
the
on.
The standard pointed cairn. I think cairn actually means hill in Gaelic. Is that correct?
I'm not 100% sure.
I think it's in Lough Crew. The mountains are called Cairnbane East and Cairnbane West. And Cairnbawn is basically Irish for White Hill, and that's probably because they were topped with white quartz. The White Hills are the white quartz. Carrowkeel's what a beautiful setting. I mean, one of them's quite awkward to get to, but there's something like 15 cairns up there, and you can usually see one or two cairns from the other cairn. Everywhere you look, you see a cairn on a peak on a horizon. It's crazy, like.
Yeah.
It's if people can get to Sligo and go there, it's well worth the visit. Certainly Carrowkeel anyway. There's another megalithic complex called Carrowmoor, which I haven't gone into. It's actually 20 miles from Carrowkeel, but I've never got into that because they're quite heavily ruined. I've tried to just talk to the ones that were in rock art or heavily intact anyway. I have been there, but I haven't talked about it in the book. It's quite a complex ground plan across the whole of Ireland and Western Europe as a whole. Like, it's indicative of a passage grave cosmology, as I say in the book. So it's astounding that this whole thing has been going on, and it's not heavily researched. Yeah, I personally don't understand why you wouldn't when they excavated these in the 1960s and got them rebuilt for public viewing. Why they didn't bring an astronomer along? If they knew they had like astronomical functions, why didn't they have an astronomer to try and figure out the alignments like? But like you say again, there's like an arrogance there that there's somebody else is stepping on their territory, on their academic field of study. Yeah, academia is not a very friendly science. Sometimes, the scientists they're very competitive and they're very aggressive to one another and each other's work. And in the scientific establishment, they often ridicule each other's work, and they reckon if it can withstand any ridicule, and the theory will last, then it's worth portraying it as a good theory. Then, so it's a bit of an aggressive science, like.
Yeah, and we're often, I suppose, in academia dealing with agendas as well, because you're looking at funding and there's a reliance on universities and that kind of thing as well. So if people step outside of the mainstream, they often become ostracized and they lose their living, which is a big consideration for a lot of people. Yeah,
well, exactly. Look at Egyptologists. I mean, it's one of the most closed sciences in the world, yeah? You have to study at a university and be awarded a degree, and then you're not allowed to talk about unless you're not allowed to have your own theory, basically, yeah? I mean, it's a branch of archaeology, and it's quite an ego-driven science. I would try not to put down another field of study. I really would. Like, I have to say, actually, Lough Crew, there's an author and archaeologist called Jean McMahon. She's the only person to ever write a book on Lough Crew. When I say book, it's actually 40 pages long, 20 of which are diagrams. And she feels the need to go into mythology in the book, but she also puts down her archaeological slogan in the book that if you can't dig up the past, you can't know about the past. And that's just not true. It's just not true, because we have a new science of astronomy to actually look into ancient monuments all around the world.
Yeah.
It seems only natural if the guys used astronomy in their monuments. It seems natural to look at it with the eyes of astronomy. And if you can find out, I mean, if you can put a compass in it, you can look at what these things were aligned to, and you can use modern software to go and wind the skies back, and you know what these guys were looking at, and sometimes you have a perfect match. Sometimes you don't even need to wind the skies back. The solstices are still there today. Yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems only natural to use another science to try and have a look at the peer into the past. I still think the archaeology is very important.
Yeah.
There's the carbon dating, there's the measurements, there's the cultural aspect, looking into Was there a farming society there? But if there's another science there that sheds light on the subject, indulge in it, man. But there's archaeologists out there saying no. If you give me the potsherds, give me the stuff that we can dig up and look at, and that's a bit of that's closing off doors and not looking inside, if you ask me.
I agree, and let's face it, everything needs a point of reference, and the point of reference for ancient cultures was up there in the sky. So it makes perfect sense for us to do the same and to use that point of reference. I suppose the old maxim comes to mind, as above, so below. And then do your work below after you have examined what's above us. Yeah.
I don't know if there's another thing that's really popped up I should bring up since we're talking about other historical histories. Have you ever heard of Göbekli Tepe?
I have indeed, yeah. In Turkey.
Yeah, I think that's really a hot little toddy at the moment for research. I mean, it's really getting talked about now and coming into the limelight. I mean, it's been discovered since the early 90s, but...
Tell us a little bit about it, James, because we haven't discussed that yet on this show with anybody.
I mean, it's doing a lot for ancient megaliths, and it's doing a lot for ancient astronomy, because there's evidence it's being aligned to the Cygnus constellation. I also go into that in the book. The Fornox monument in Knoll, it's on the border of Dublin and Meath. It's got alignments to the Cygnus constellation, and Callanish stone circles also aligned to the Cygnus constellation. So megalithic monuments around the world seem to be obsessed with the Cygnus constellation as well. But Göbekli Tepe's in Turkey. I think the nearest town would be Sanliurfa. But what's so special about that place is it's dating to at least 8,000 BC, maybe 10,000 BC, and we have no idea. I mean, it's been carbon dated to that, like, yeah. It's mainstream accepted as that's the date it was built, and we have no idea what was going on. There's evidence that it's actually been intentionally buried to cover it over to preserve it. I mean, there's something like, if you picture like Stonehenge, there's like stone circles there, and they've got pillars that are T-shaped, and they've got weird, strange animals and figures carved onto them. And the experts carving that off the figurines, I think there's like foxes and birds and boars and stuff, like all animals and weird human faces. And I mean, there was a National Geographic article just quite recently on it. So yeah, it's coming into mainstream and it's accepted, and it's really indicative of an ancient lost civilization, because there shouldn't be a civilization back then there as far as mainstream archaeology is telling us. Like,
well, that's it, and that's something that really interests me, because it's something that can't be ignored, because it is there, yet it's very, very inconvenient to mainstream archaeology, as we have, I suppose, been led to believe the truth is up to now. So how they're dealing with that and how they're kind of skirting around the subject so far is fascinating, and it's something that can't be ignored because it's there.
Not anymore, no, and that's the beauty of Göbekli Tepe, because it stands there begging answers, like, come figure me out, because there's something like only 4% of the whole site has been uncovered so far. I mean, it's going to take them years, John, years upon years. The scale of the complex, there's at least 20 of these spiral circles, and I mean, they literally backfilled the whole mountain in to cover this thing and protect it. Again, personally, I think it's in the time of the ancient Great Floods, and we know that the Great Flood happened in 10,000 BC because of the glacial information that we now have of that epoch. I don't know if you read the work of Graham Hancock or...
I do, in depth, actually, yeah.
Do you? Yeah. I'm actually on the Graham Hancock forum at the moment. I'm talking to the author of the month there. He's a friend of mine, Walter Cutnan, and he's got a conference in America that he gives the people a lot of platform. He's actually asked me to go over for the CPAC conference and talk about my book. I actually can't make it. I would love to go, but he's got a platform for a lot of these authors to go and talk about this stuff, like, and he's one of the guys he knows, Robert Schock. You know, the Göbekli Tepe's helping him out as well, because, you know, he redated the Sphinx with geological evidence and took a lot of arrows in the back of it.
That's right, yeah.
And you know, also Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock pointed out precession of the equinoxes with the Great Pyramids and the Giza Orion theory, and that pointed to the epoch 10,500 BC. Graham Hancock would go into a lot of precession of the equinoxes. He's done great work on it. He would probably be, you know, a mammoth in terms of the precessional research that's been done around ancient cultures around the world. But they were pointing at 10,500 BC. Robert Schoch, he probably pointed to conservatively 7,000 BC for the dating of the Sphinx, and Egyptologists laughed at them. They just turned around and went, "What are you talking about? There was no civilization there.
Mm-hmm.
You give me the potsherds, show me something we can dig up with from that civilization if you can find it." And they tried to ridicule them, and look at them now. They have Göbekli Tepe. They have something there that's highly advanced, moving large multi-ton stones, expert carving, astronomical alignments. Yeah, at a time when we don't know anything about it, so there is something there, like the Göbekli Tepe. It's a very important discovery for the world. It really is,
And it's a real case of watch this space with regard to A, what happens and is uncovered there, and B, how the mainstream treats it.
I think there's a German guy, I think it's Schmidt, isn't his name?
Klaus Schmidt, I believe.
Yeah, he's doing heading the research there, and but he's been going at it since '93, so they're literally getting teaspoons to dig the earth away and have a look at it, and they're doing a thorough job. You have to understand that that's the way archaeology has to process,
Yeah.
But in doing it in the method that they do, and that's why I do have a lot of regard for archaeology sometimes as a science. There is good science that comes out of it. There is a bad attitude comes out of it too. But they have uncovered the strange fact that by going down layer by layer, that they were able to get a layer of material and prove that it was actually backfilled in about 8,000 BC. So they know that it was in existence for 2,000 years, and that for some reason they filled it in.
Okay.
Well, that doesn't make sense, and that's more anomalous and more stranger than finding the place itself, in that epoch. It's strange enough to find this place at a point in 10,000 BC, and it's highly advanced technological function. Robert Schoch's been there, and he thinks that these things, there's an acoustic effect off these T-shaped pillars. They're like tuning forks almost, They're a strange place, and
yeah.
Yeah, watch this space, John. That's definitely it,
Well, it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. And I suppose, speaking of fascinating, your book is out very, very soon. Tell us about how people can get their hands on it and what they need to do.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully, we're talking the middle of October, and it'll be on Amazon UK and Amazon US. And I'll have links to my website, newgrangecosmology.com. If you want to buy the book there, I can just redirect you there. And I will be doing signed copies on the website as well if somebody wants to grab a copy there.
Excellent. So, yeah. Well, the book is The Newgrange Sirius Mystery, Linking Passage Grave Cosmology with Dogon Symbology by E.A. James Swagger. James, it's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you on Alchemy Radio today, and I very much look forward to our next chat. What's next for you?
Good question. That's a good question. I've been thinking that this last week, John. So, I've been thinking of whether to go back to my historical mysteries book that I half finished and jumped and went on a tangent with my megalithic book. But I've done a series of research, and I don't know which one to do first. Archaeoacoustics is another subject I really like, and that's that these ancient monuments, particularly coming back to Newgrange. Newgrange is situated in the largest natural amphitheatre in the world. I don't know if you know that. It's a rare little place.
I didn't know that.
Probably why they chose that. It's just sitting in a bowl, basically, in the valley, and it's a natural amphitheatre. But yeah, the megalithic civilization, they talk about them as a sonar culture as well, because there's megaliths in Malta that, they have knowledge of acoustics, and they built chambers like Newgrange, Loughcrew, Malta with acoustic effects. And perhaps they were chanting inside the chambers. Who knows? But there's this new found science of archaeoacoustics, which again is among good science of archaeology and acoustic technology. Mm-hmm. There's evidence, again, Stonehenge has rare acoustic effects. I don't know if you know that or heard about that.
I haven't. No.
There's work of a guy called Paul Devereaux. He's done a lot of research around. He's done another place as well. I think it was the Epidaurus Theatre in Greece, and they weird acoustic effects over there. And he's brought some knowledge to light that these were acoustic monuments as well as astronomy. Where the stones are actually positioned in Stonehenge, if you apply the science or the physics of it, that they would, if you stood in the center and or spoke loudly, that it actually has an amplifying effect where the way the sound waves coalesce back with each other and amplify at certain points outside the circle. And he's literally got an omnidirectional speaker. You'll know this as a DJ.
Yeah.
He had sound equipment, and he sent out pulses of different frequencies in an omnidirectional speaker at the center of Stonehenge, and found out that the pulses and sounds got amplified as you got away from the circle at a certain distance.
Amazing.
Which is just amazing. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, it's another subject in research I really want to go into, especially because Newgrange and Loch Crew also have strange acoustic effects, and again, that could be indicative of the alternative states of consciousness that I was talking about. So yeah, it's another area of research I think I'd really get into. So much out there though, John, yeah. But yeah, the astronomy I'm going to probably put down for a moment, but I do want to also come back and do a more thorough book on Pasage grade cosmology, because I have some beautiful stuff that I haven't talked about in the book that's outside Ireland. So yeah, we'll have another chat again sometime.
We certainly will. I'll be very much looking forward to it. Once again, the website is newgrangecosmology.com. James Swagger, it's been enlightening speaking to you on Alchemy. Thanks a million for joining me today.
My pleasure, John. It's been great.
Alchemy Radio.
Alchemy Radio.